But what we're going to try to do today is create the narrative that connects the dots for 30 years of gross deception that has harmed literally millions of children deliberately, maybe not with malintent, but it has happened not by accident. Let's just say that. So we're going to try to do the narrative. And I think it's important that to get through this data, we're not going to try to make you memorize numbers that are in the lies of Texas. We're going to try to quickly point out some of those numbers and put them in context to the narrative. The bedrock principles, we can never get away with this from this reality that the state of Texas did not wake up one morning and say, wow, we haven't been doing a good job for children of color. Wow, it's been 21 years since the end of segregation, or 25 years really, and the end of separate but equal school systems. Back in 1972, Federal Judge William Wayne Justice issued Civil Order 5281. And to me, it is the beginning of the mission that the state of Texas should have honestly observed over the last 30 years, but did not. In that order, Judge Justice ordered the Texas Education Agency to develop curricula offerings and programs to compensate minority group children for uneducational opportunities resulting from past or present racial and ethnic isolation. The state of Texas may not want to acknowledge it, but that was the start of student accountability testing for accountability purposes. But it was 21 years, 1993, before the Texas legislature passed Senate Bill 7. And it mirrored the language or the intent of Civil Order 5281. Finally, the legislature wrote, the achievement gap between educationally disadvantaged students and other populations will be closed. The bill also included something very important, and that is the State Board of Education shall determine the level of performance considered to be satisfactory on the assessment instruments. And this is vital because I believe too many civil rights attorneys have got hung up on an easy path out of the fight by just willingly ceding that this statutory and even constitutional authority of the diffusion of knowledge gave the state of Texas the ultimate, total, unchallengeable authority to lie and grossly misrepresent satisfactory performance in terms of closing the achievement gap. But that's what they've been doing since Senate Bill 7 and the start of the TAS testing program. And these things were done by 1995. The TEA won a Supreme Court of Texas decision that once again refers to the constitutional duty of the Texas Education Agency when it wrote, the achievement gap between property-rich and property-poor districts will be closed. There's other language that talks about students, not just property-rich and property-poor districts. By 2000, the federal court kicked in to the judicial thing when it ruled that the state of Texas had not imposed an unconstitutional thing. But it wrote something extremely important. The attorneys for the state of Texas either did not effectively or did not meaningfully argue whether or not there was integrity to the TAS and the accountability system that became the first constitutional test. Because the federal court ruled, because of the rigid state-mandated correlation between the Texas Essential Knowledge of Skills and the TAS test, the court finds that all Texas students have an equal opportunity to learn items, test questions, which is the issue before the court. We can leave that now because as we go through the lies of Texas, the lies of Texas is designed to take those foundational principles that have guided the Texas Education Agency since 1990, really, when the TAWS was being field tested and first administered, all the way through 2021. And so if we can go to the next graph where we have Commissioner Morath. I think it was on page 2.
There we go. I just need a moment here, Mr. Scott. So we're understanding that the state of Texas has a constitutional duty to provide an equitable education for students, and that the state of Texas is alone responsible for defining that.
That is right, because this is the graph that I'm talking about right here. And we've talked about this before, so I'm going to go through it quickly, because remember, our goal is to get through the 30 years, and it's not an easy challenge, but we'll do it. Before the Texas Association of School Board, and both you and I and our colleagues on TLSBA board at that time were present, I asked Dr. Morath a very cutting bottom line question. And remember, we've talked about the constitutional duty. We've talked about achievement gap. We've talked about equity. I asked him explicitly, Commissioner, how does the Texas Education Agency define its achieving equity for students under Senate Bill 7, under the Supreme Court decision of 1995 we just reviewed, and under the federal court decision? And this is one of those in the weeds, nerdy questions that come back and haunt people, or at least it should. He knew he had to answer the question truthfully, and the answer was the cut score of approaches. Using its authority, even in 1819, the last non-COVID year, long ago from TAWS and tax, it is current, it is real time. The state of Texas uses approach to define its burden of constitutional equity. Well, we come to find, and on page 8 of the Lives of Texas, what you see is putting meat on the bone of this. Because what I've done here is just as of 1819, which we're using primarily, look at the level of approach. We'll take 6th grade reading. I'm not asking you to memorize these numbers. The state of Texas says that in 6th grade reading, you get 57.5% of the question right, and you have passed the test, and the state gets a gold star for achieving equity. In 6th grade math, 36.8% of the questions right on a criterion test. This is a test that measures skills. It is not a test designed to create a bell curve. And so what you see, even today, is that approach below grade level, meeting constitutional equity, is a survivor from 1990, 1993, 1995, all the way through the TAWS era, all the way through the tax era. Survivor in this sense, while the nomenclature may have changed, being below grade level is okay for the Texas Education Agency as long as it gets to use that demarcation, that annotation to help achieve equity for at-risk kids dominated by children of color. So
Mr. Scott, we just want to be clear then. So in the state of Texas, we do not need to get students to grade level in order to meet our constitutional duty of offering an equitable education. Instead, what we've done is we've created another level that we call approaching grade level. And so those students, from what we see on this chart, a student could correctly answer, say, some 37 to 40 to 45 to 50% of questions correct and still pass the state test, the star in this instance. Tell me if we're getting that correct.
That's exactly right. But also look at the demarcation or the parameters of grade level above. It's not a surprise that the higher you go up at end of course English 1, 2, algebra and biology and U.S. history, look at the math and science criterion scores, 38.9% for approach, 38% in biology, 42% in history. But even the beginning level of grade level in the EOC courses is in the 60 to 66% range. So it's tragic at approach. It's squishy at meets. And the next table we're going to show you kind of puts a face on what this means. And we have, the next one is page 24. Well, no, we'll go ahead and cover this one, no problem. Now, remember, the key phrase was approach. When you look at, and let's take fifth grade reading as an example. If we went down to the higher grades, it would be more dramatic. But 394,750 fifth graders took the reading test. 23% failed it, but 49% were below grade level, because the number at approach, when you do the statistics, when you do the third grade math to define just at approach, 26% met the approach standard, but did not meet the grade level standard. So why don't we go down on that table just a little bit? Let's go up to one of the higher grades.
Before we do, Mr. Scott, could we just point out that this takes a bit of math for anyone who's looking at a TEA report. The TEA essentially breaks it out into the percent that failed, the 23, for instance, in the top row, and the 77 who met equity. But what we're understanding you to suggest is that there are some, for instance, in the instance of the top row, there are some 26% of students who passed the state test, but were below grade level. So they've
absolutely, and that's at the fifth grade. Look below, look at this. We need to go to some math just to make a difference, and then we'll move on, because I think it's important. We're going to spend a disproportionate amount of time in setting the foundation, understanding the foundation. Going down to seventh grade math.
Seventh grade math.
There we go. There were 352,970 seventh graders who took the seventh grade math test. 27% failed it, but 32% were at approach, passing the test, but not at grade level. 59% of the seventh graders were below grade level, but the state gets to claim a 73% equity standard. Look at seventh grade math for at risk. 80%, which is 54% of the seventh grade students, were below grade level in seventh grade math in 18-19, the last COVID year. I think we can move beyond these tables unless you have a question on that. But what it shows is that the word that the question that I asked Mike Maratha that day, what's the definition of equity? And he said the cut score of approach. This is putting meat on the bone of that acknowledgement. We didn't even have to use Clegg lights. We didn't have to put him under a truth serum. We didn't have to waterboard him. He just told the truth. And the truth is incredibly bad for minority children who compromise the statistical domination of at-risk, economically disadvantaged children in Texas.
Mr. Scott, let me just make sure we're checking for understanding here, but if we're following across the at-risk line then for seventh grade math, we see how it is that, if I'm understanding you correctly, the TEA will report then that 58% of students, of at-risk students, are meeting the constitutional burden for equity in the state of Texas, whereas 4 out of 5 students, 80% of at-risk seventh graders, are below grade level in math.
I'm going to offer a minor correction to that, a minor adjustment, not a correction. The numbers are right. The analysis is exactly right. The only modification I'm going to make is the state of Texas doesn't like to talk about constitutional equity. Okay. That green is a number under a title that the state won't formally write. The approach is a number that the state won't formally write. The red, the 80, is a number. This takes people who are not beholden to the state and to the industry that has a vested interest in not telling the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. If we could go to page 24 of the report, and we're just going to look at one grade because it all holds up here, okay? And this is there you go. Yeah, go right there. No, that's it. Perfect. 10th grade reading. What we're using this table to show for, now remember, there's a tremendous amount of narrative associated with it. It's about 110 or 112 pages. But was there a Texas educational miracle? Well, if you look at this, the absolute answer is yes. In 10th grade reading in 92, 93, 56% of the African Americans, 56% of the Hispanics, and 52% of the economic disadvantaged taking 10th grade reading passed the test. By 2001, 2002, the last year that TAS was implemented, 90% of those groups were passing the test. Well done, thy good and faithful servant. I like to say sarcastically that it was a famous person's first mission accomplished, but I won't say that on this broadcast. It's the same thing in math. 34% of African Americans were passing the 10th grade math test when TAS was unveiled, 85% later. So I think what these tables have done is demonstrate the constitutional and statutory and administrative foundation of the TAS miracle, and it has demonstrated the absolute success, but also how. Now, we did show star tables, but to show the present. But what we're going to do now is we're going to start walking a little bit through the TAS era on the foundation, and I hope by the time we're all through, we're going to see it. So I guess the next thing is, if I'm asking myself a question, is did the TEA strongly defend all of this? And the answer to that question is yes. A couple of examples you'll find in the Laws of Texas that the National Academy of Sciences held a big confab out in Irvine, California. It's one of two honorariums. It was the first and last honorarium I got to go out to the National Academy of Sciences to ask questions of the Texas folks. It was about Texas and Kentucky. And the key thing is that at that meeting, the Associate Commissioner for the Texas Education Agency went just in total detail. This is a grade level test. Are the questions appropriate? Should a student have learned this by the time of that grade? We have panels, we have specialists, we're making this. Remember, this is a grade level test. In the Laws of Texas, and thanks to your group, you're going to be able to see the full transcript of that commissioner's presentation to the National Academy of Science. Strong defense. In 1999, coincidentally, less than a year before the federal court was going to make a decision on the constitutionality of TAS, Dallas ISD did an internal study. You're going to see that. We'll show you something here in a minute. I think there is a graph that you can find. Let me see. I think there is a graph. Well, let me just do it narrative. The Dallas did an internal study that showed that comparing its students, all of its students who took the Iowa Test of Basic Skills, and all of its students who also took the TAS test of that era, in the 10th grade, passing grade level performance was equivalent to the 10th national percentile ranking in math, and 10th percentile in reading, and the 23rd percentile in math.
Mr. Scott, we need to dwell there for just a moment there so that we don't miss the significance of what you just said. If I'm understanding you correctly, what you were suggesting that if I were a student in that era and if I took the Iowa Test of Basic Skills, I would have gotten, say, a score of, say, some 10% in reading or 23% in math.
It's not quite that. Let me do it. Because they're different scales. What it says is very fundamental. If you pass the TAS test at the 10th grade, the commissioner wrote Dallas ISD. This is grade level. It is a criterion test. Mask all of the language that the associate commissioner out at the National Academy of Science did. But when you do a correlation study between what does it mean when a student passes the 10th grade exit reading test and the 10th grade math test, and you put it in a computer and it comes out and you have correlations, it equated out to 23rd percentile in math and 10th percentile in reading. Beyond that, that's just the bottom line. Passing TAS and passing TAS math and passing TAS reading was roughly equivalent to functional illiteracy. Not that everybody who passed TAS, because you have higher level performance, okay? But just getting to that de minimis cut score, that threshold score of passing meant nothing. If you weren't blowing off the tops of the TAS test, you were below genuine grade level. And you'll see some tables on that, down the line. So, there were other things that were going on. When you start looking at when did the wheels start falling off, it really started falling off pretty early, 1995, believe it or not. Dr. Kathleen Coburn did a report. Look to page 63. Dr. Coburn was an attorney, and she was a curriculum administrator at Temple. And basically what she did was her team analyzed the math tests at 3rd through 8th and 10th grade exit tests and told the Texas Education Agency in 1995 that at the exit level in particularly, but at all grade levels, that the test was measuring below grade level skills. But the state of Texas has the audacity to go to Irvine, California, the audacity to tell Dallas ISD that passing TAS is grade level. Yet the abundance of evidence was growing even early that there was something terribly wrong. The next indication, the American Federation, I'm sorry.
Do you mind, Mr. Scott, helping us to focus our eyes on what it is that we're seeing here? Because, for instance, if I'm reading...
All right, let's just take one, the 10th grade math test.
10th grade math.
You can see that. How many of the 109 identified elements, remember the statement, the essential elements, 0% of the questions were at 10th grade, 28% of the questions were at 8th grade, 36% were at 7th grade, 32% were at 6th grade, and 3.7% were at 4th grade. Okay? That's what it means. The state of Texas knew early on that they had created an assessment that allowed it to deceptively and dishonestly assert that it was closing the achievement gap for children of color, more appropriately, economically disadvantaged children, statistically dominated by children of color.
Despite the fact, Mr. Scott, that there was not a single grade level question on the 10th grade math test.
Well, and others, that's exactly right. And others have proved that as well, including a study out of Mathematically Correct. We're going to get to some others here if we want to go through it. We don't have a graphic for this, but I made reference to it. The American Federation of Teachers, somewhere in the 1996-97, did a study of 4 national tests, including the TAS math test, and called the TAS math test the easiest test that it had done. It used a phrase like, the answers jump out at you. Yes, they did. So it was more of the accumulated. The RAND Corporation. And look, all of the references that we're making here are fully provided, and there's download files of the full documents. The narrative here is important. As the state of Texas was asserting that this was a grade level instrument, the RAND Corporation out at that same NAS conference, Dr. Stephen Klein was making a presentation, And he said, I'm not saying they're cheating, but something is wrong. Meaning the RAND Corporation, and it's hard to get more professional than that, came in and looked at 4 years of tests at the 10th grade and other tests too. And the chart you see on the screen now is the test started topping out basically at the 7th grade. 7th grade, and they used different standards than the state of Texas for a very good reason. They wanted to honestly assess the rigor of the test. But that chart is just very, very powerful. 7th grade was barely above the 4th grade. 8th grade was barely above the 5th grade. The exit test was barely above the 5th grade. And algebra didn't even hit the pre-mark of pre-algebra. So they made this presentation out at the National Academy of Sciences. You may have another one there from the RAND Corporation. If not, okay, there you go. They even did. I gave them a lot of information, so we had the percentage of correct answers. we had the raw score distributions, and so they did it. The percentage of students with correct answers on the TAS exit exam on estimated. You saw down at the 3rd and 4th grade, high levels of students were getting the right answers. When the questions were on a more rigorous 4th or 5th grade, less. When the questions were on a 5th to 6th grade level, even fewer. On the 6th and 7th grade level, even fewer. All of this accumulated data shows that the state of Texas, the foundation, and I think we're going to have to move on pretty quickly here to get into the transition to tax. But what you're seeing is that the entire systemic modus operandi, so to say, was to pack the test, particularly at the exit level, upper grades, particularly at the ones that were used to calibrate college readiness, to pack that with below grade level assessments so the state would look good. And so what you see is what we have is a situation where the state of Texas had created a very significant problem for itself. That's on Dallas. We can move past that. There's a table on page 35 that you might want to look at. It's the transition passing to tax. So you come up to 2001 and 2. The miracle is firmly embedded in the public persona. The Texas governor who ran on it is president of the United States now. There's a lot of passages about that period of time in the book itself. But what did the state of Texas have to do when it transitioned to the harder tax test? And the answer was, it's two-part. What the state admitted, I call them the smoking gun tables, they're in the book, we're not going to show them here, was the state devalued the value of TAS when it transitioned to tax. For instance, in 10th grade math, it said that passing TAS was worth about 20% of the questions right on the new tax. They had exhaustive field testing to show how students who did on TAS would do under the first year of tax. And so what they had to do was, instead of having passing standards, 65, 70% for grade level, they had to reduce it. And this is where the trend of reducing the passing standard to make up for harder tests and creating and sustaining the image of constitutional equity. Look at that. Look at the 11th grade math. When the state of Texas introduced 11th grade math, you had to get 42% of the questions right to pass it and meet grade level, to approach, in effect. 51% in English language, 44% in science, 40% in social studies. At 10th grade math, 45, 48, 40. I mean, just the numbers there are dramatic. TAWS was such a low-level test that the state was about to climb Mount Everest without oxygen and Sherpas when it introduced the tax test. And so what did they do? They cut the content mastery. And when they cut the content mastery of the number of questions you needed to get right in tax, it is something that persists, and we have demonstrated conclusively through the STAR era. So this transition to tax, and the fact there's a lot of interesting tables in the that will probably be in the transcript we provide of this meeting, of this webinar. And so basically what we've done so far is we have moved from the principles of TAWS. We have seen some of the major movements and the major analysis of TAWS, and we have to any reasonable evaluation, to any reasonable independent evaluation of integrity, we have demonstrated that the foundation of the accountability system in the state of Texas was compromised. And we have demonstrated that the transition to, quote, a harder test was compromised with tax and remains compromised today. You might want to move, if you want to some of those questions, whether they're end of course biology or some of the questions. I think that starts about 101, page 101. Oh, okay. The absurdity of what the state of Texas did. Here's a question, and in end of course biology, during the TAWS era, just to show the foundation, the state would use biological terms to call a question biology, even though the underlying question dealt with 3rd, 4th, 5th, and 6th grade skills. For instance, that question did not have anything to do with the collared lizard or Crotophytus phytus colaris. It really wants to know how much longer is this lizard than the other lizard? And it even lets you know that one of those squares is 5 centimeters. If someone wants to make that an actual biology question, why don't you scroll down to a couple of more? Oh, here's great. What does the student have to do to get a better measurement? How about hold the beaker straight? How tall is that? How tall is that mushroom? You don't have to know anything about mushrooms. How tall is that bear? Okay, go down a couple of more. You know, there you go. How a fungus affects plant growth. Okay, you don't need to know anything about fungus, plant growth, mass, healthy plant with fungus. All you have to do is read a 6th or 7th grade chart and know the trend lines. The flash lines are going up X per thing. The trend line, the dotted line is going up. It is not a biology question. It is an underlying 6th or 7th grade chart question with biological terms on it. There's another one down here that is one of my favorite. Keep going. There we go. Here's ones about unusual human karyotype and chromosomes. Which chromosome is different? You don't have to know anything about chromosomes. All you have to know that a circle is not a twisted X. On the one on the right, unusual human karyotype. You don't have to know anything about human karyotype. All you have to know is that all the symbols on the page, only one has 3 twisted X's. That's all you need to know. This was the approach in TAWS. It was the approach of end of course, and it represented the magnitude and scope of the problem that persists, that forced the state of Texas to dramatically cut passing standards so they can continue to misrepresent their constitutional equity to disadvantaged children. You might want to go to some of those parallel questions. I know that you had asked me, okay, here's an example back on TAWS. Look at the questions that were on the 10th grade. And remember, 10th grade was used to calibrate college readiness. Well, the same kind of question that appeared on TAWS in the 10th grade appeared on the 5th grade, the 5th grade, the 6th grade, the 6th grade, the 7th grade. And I just pulled a few out of the original test. So when Kathleen Coburn said they were testing below grade level, when the RAND Corporation said, I'm not saying they're cheating, but something is wrong. When Mathematically Correct said the mean grade level of these questions on the 10th grade exit test are 4th, 5th, and 6th grade, you don't have to be a psychometrician to understand when you look at those questions in context. This reminds me of a story. Early on in the process, I had been on the Commissioner's Accountability Advisory Committee, and I resigned in protest because I had come to understand what a farce the system was. And I asked to go back and interview a string of experts, testing experts. And for some reason, the commissioner let me do it. He should have said no, but he let me do it. And there were 15 or so people in the room. And my first question was, there were testing experts, curriculum administrators, outside consultants. And I asked this question. Steve goes into a restaurant with a $20 bill. He spends $6.85 on food. How much change should Steve get? And my question is, when do you want your child and your grandchild to be able to answer that question? The silence and the refusal to come to grips with that reality was stunning. No one wanted to answer that question. Jamie, are you there?
I am here, Mr. Scott. So we're wondering, many of these questions, these are TAS era questions. Any sense of how this has resolved itself? Has the TEA addressed this?
Well, let me ask a question. I'm not saying, how much time do we have left?
We have 20 minutes.
Oh, that is wonderful. I pushed the wrong button on my timer, Dr. Mathias. And so 20 minutes. I think before I get to your question, I want to try to summarize why we have spent so much time on TAWS and the transition to tax, why that happens in the book. And I don't think we'll be showing many more graphics, so maybe we can come off of, of screen share here. There is a truth, there is a fundamental truth. If the foundation is bad, if it's corrupt, then the house or the structure you build on that foundation is subject to collapse. And we've seen that in videos, we've seen that in systems, we've seen that in organizations. What the Lies of Texas does is try to prove conclusively that the foundation of accountability testing had one goal, kind of like Curly from that movie, one goal. And that one goal was to hoodwink courts of law and parents and civil rights attorneys and corporate vendors and the whole educational bureaucracy that has made millions and billions of dollars on the system. It was to hoodwink them, hoodwink the parents of children, of disadvantaged children, that William Wayne Justice courageously said, we're going to close the achievement gap, we're going to compensate minority group children for past racial isolation. It was to hoodwink the parents and the children that they had met their burden. It is impossible for me to espouse more strongly that what the system has needed for 30 years is a memory loss. And what our effort here is to restore the memory so that we can talk about the current in the context of the foundation. The truth of the matter is, in our first two series, we've spent most of the time on the STAR era. We've spent time on college graduation rates because it would be terribly unproductive to start with the foundation when people might want to say, well, that was 30 years ago. So that's the reason we started with kids aren't graduating from college. Kids have low performance, kids that don't go with reasonably well college entrance scores, which is a significant number, are dropping by the wayside. They're getting dead. 60%, 80% of at-risk kids or economically disadvantaged kids, or 60% in some school districts of at-risk kids, they're performing below grade level, but they've met the state's equity burden. That's where we started. But to understand the tragedy of where we are today, I so much appreciate that you've given us an opportunity to do the foundation, because that's where we are. Now, your question is, has the TEA responded? Have they taken any of this into consideration? If they have, they've hidden it well. The TEA has been doubling down on deception from the moment it scored its first TOS test. From the moment it declared a Texas educational miracle. From the moment it declared in 2001 that the equity gap had essentially been closed. From the moment that they rigged the tax scores. Every step along the way through today, they're unrepentant. There's no remorse. Institutional. I'm not trying to personalize this. You and I know a lot of these people. We're talking about institutions here. And sometimes good people believe the end justifies the means. And I think a lot of people understand what the TEA has done, understands what the TEA is doing, but there is a greater good. You and I believe in a different greater good, I believe.
Tremendous. Mr. Scott, appreciate your going through the lies of Texas with us. Any concluding thoughts as now having written this work on the lies of Texas? What does this mean for the road that lies ahead?
Well, that's the challenge that you and I have. We talked, first of all, we met 4 or 5 years ago, however long ago it was, when I joined the Texas Association of School Boards. And we've had many conversations on this subject long before our separate paths brought us together in this effort. What I hope comes out of this, and we know, we believe that we're getting good response to this. We have reason to believe that the response is very positive and growing. But here's what I want to tell the Texas Education Agency and those that want to defend the status quo. Dr. Mathias, the Latino school boards, and George Scott are not disappointed if we don't have 100,000 viewers today. We're looking for our first national reporter. We're looking for our first, perhaps out-of-state civil rights attorney. We're looking for someone who can go beyond our individual strength, who can go beyond the strength of a new organization, fully and completely dedicated, committed to equity for children. And that's what I hope happens. I hope that these first three, where we've really covered the waterfront, we have gone from TAS to STAR, to college graduation, and your group has done something that's not been done before. You're putting up transcripts, you're making the videos available. And I think you and I are going to have to spend the next week or so really packaging this and reaching out. There's already been some effort made in that direction, we know. And we need to find allies that are bigger than us, that are more important than us. You know, there are organizations in the state of Texas that pretend to care about children. I think, and have come to conclude after many years, and I'm 72, and not really a total cynic, but I have my share of it. I think that too many of the groups, even the ones that you and I have been a part of, or you and I, the ones that we have observed, at some point the mission is compromised by not doing important things, but by becoming more important to other important people. And when the goal becomes to become important to other important people, that's when people start making compromises. And I know in my heart of hearts, you and I, we're not going to compromise our commitment to at-risk children, disadvantaged children of all ethnicities. So we're going to take a break, and we're going to be back in the game. You've got some traveling to do. I've got some data pulling to do. And we're not going to be so much focused. This is probably the last time that we'll ever focus on the foundation, TAS. But I'm glad you agreed that is something we needed to do for the record. Where people that we may send this to Wednesday or Thursday, whether it's in New York or Los Angeles or Washington or wherever we send it to, in search of that big ally, where they can sit down and spend an evening and read the transcripts and see the videos, see the passion, see the commitment, and maybe, just maybe, we will find that path forward. I'm glad that we're trying. We are trying.
Mr. Scott, we really appreciate your helping us to set the foundation for all of this. You know, I'm just thinking as I see some of your data, how fascinating it would be for us to see if we might replicate some of those studies by Dr. Coburn and Mathematically Correct today with the STAR. That is to say, to see, for instance, the data of how a 10th grade exit test could just as easily have been answered by an 8th grader, since there were no 9th or 10th grade questions on it, just boggles the mind that we have allowed this in our state for far too long.
You know, the answer to your question is yes. The further answer to your question is, I've already devised a public information request to targeted school districts. You probably recognize a few, I do. To the Texas Education Agency, where our statisticians, and I'm going to name their name, but you know we consult with 2 statisticians. I'm on the line to a very prestigious math expert out of the University of California, one of the California universities. We can do something really, really important, exactly along, and it won't be prehistoric. You know, we're not going to go back and dig up bones from the TAS era, although I think the bones we dug up were well dug. Okay. We can go to 15, 16, 16, 17, 17, 18, 18, 19, the last 4 straight years of non-COVID impact. And we can go this way and we can go that way with a very sophisticated request for data. And we can turn the data over to our statisticians, and we will have those answers. And there's not a thing that the TEA can do to stop us, except one thing. We need support. We're going to need some financial support. So you had the courage, and I'm not, you know, I don't say things like this. You and your leadership team had the courage to make an incredibly bold decision to walk away from somewhere else where the salary was good, and to say the commitment was not nearly as strong that I could justify. You've made a courageous decision. I've made a couple of those in my career too. But we know that we started this on a hope and a prayer. As a pastor, it's probably not the first hope and a prayer you've ever had. And as one who believes, it's not the first hope and prayer I've had. We've started this with the job of finding some allies who do not care about being important to the governor, to the commissioner of education, to the local senator, to the House of Representatives, to a vendor that makes millions and hundreds of millions of dollars in this industry. We are searching for someone who wants to be important to the least important among us. And that is the economically disadvantaged children who have been skewered by this system for 30 years. That's what we're hunting for. And, I hate to go preacher on you, but that's my sermon for today. That's what we need.
Mr. Scott, we so greatly appreciate your time. We'll come back to you for last words in just a moment. In the meantime, we just want to direct all of our readers to our TLSBA website. That's tlsba.org/research is the tab where you'll find all of the research that we're producing, the monographs, Mr. Scott's work, The Lies of Texas, also various transcripts from our conversations to date. So we invite you to check those out. Mr. Scott's book, The Lies of Texas, is also available on Amazon. Final words, Mr. Scott, before we bid adieu for today?
Let me ask a question because I haven't looked in. We had about 40 documents uploaded to go. Are those available online?
We'll make sure that Carlos and our team is uploading those to our TLSBA research page so that everyone will have access. What I'm understanding is that you've made available an archive of some 40 documents. And so
Correct.
We want all of our friends to make sure that we'll make sure that our friends this afternoon have access to them.
And that's the reason I wanted to ask the question, because it's a monumental task. Okay, because it's about 2/3 of my primary research. I think the message that you and I want to give by uploading that is we're not subtracting here. We may take shortcuts in summarizing these things. We didn't read The Lies of Texas. I did my best to try to pull out the points. But the bottom line is, this is an organization, if we make a statement here, and I say that Stephen Klein said this at the Rand Corporation, or the Commissioner of Education said this to Dallas, or the Associate Commissioner said this to the National Academy of Science, or Mathematically Correct said this, you're going to have the entire document. There's nothing that we're saying, nothing that we're talking about that is not the desire is 100% disclosure. Okay, and that's our commitment. As we've reached the first threshold of this effort, my heart of hearts is buoyed by the fact that we've got to do this. A year ago, I never envisioned that we would even have a chance to do this. And I'm hopeful, I'm faithful, but our constituent, our client, are at-risk kids, economically disadvantaged kids in the state of Texas. And you and I are never going to take our eye off of that.
Tremendous. Mr. Scott, we so greatly appreciate your presence with us today. Also, we just really appreciate your passion and your interest, years of dedication and research and advocacy for our Latino and African-American students here in the state of Texas. Really appreciate that. As Mr. Scott had suggested, we're going to take a 2-week break. So this is the conclusion of our first 3-week webinar, and then we'll look forward to announcing the next webinar series in our eBlast next Tuesday.
Can I say one other thing?
Go for it.
We're not going to get any nicer or any less tough.
So all who have been listening to us have been warned. It doesn't get any more pretty, I'm understanding. So as we continue to dig into the data, let's see what it means for our students and those who serve them, but more especially, let's see what it is that we working together can do about it to change the systems and the situations that are causing this for our students. Thank you, Mr. Scott. We thank
Thank
all
you.
for joining us today. We want to thank all our friends at Eugene and Associates for their sponsorship of this episode, and we'll look forward to being back in 3 weeks. Have a great day.